I need a volunteer up with me today, one who can move and groove a little bit with your body. Will somebody come and join me now? I need one person. The sermon gets longer the later we go. All right, Patricia, up. Oh, and my daughter came too. All right, okay. Well, we'll make this work. Okay, guys, we're going to play a game called Mirror, okay? Is anybody familiar with this game? So you watch like the other person is in the mirror. So one person is the leader, and this got infinitely more difficult now that we have 3 people. Now, we're going to do 4. Perfect. Okay. All right. So I will be across from my mom. Okay. Mary Jane will be across from Patricia. And so we're going to let you guys start. How about that? Phoebe and Mary Jane, if you would start making motions, and Patricia is going to follow Mary Jane, I am going to follow Phoebe, and we're going to start moving. And then we'll switch. Does that sound good, everybody? Yeah. Okay. All right, here we go. All right. Wonderful. Thank you so very much. All right. My person I was following was getting a little distracted by the other ones because they were so fun to watch, right? Ooh, how was that, Mary Jane? Patricia, what do you think? Yeah? Yeah? Was it easy? Were you mirroring exactly what you saw, or when they were doing the right arm, you were doing your opposite right arm?
It was so much easier when I was leading.
Yeah. Isn't that true? When you were leading, and then you don't have to pay as much attention about what's happening on the other side. And do you cheat? Do you do exactly what they're doing, or do you put your own flair to it? That's always the question. Flaring a lot. Okay, well, this is a great image and direction for us today as we encounter the book of James. Have you ever watched a child as they begin to encounter a mirror for the very first time? Maybe a little bit like this. Who is that person on the other side? Flirting with it, excited that there's a friend there that they can play with, and yet the friend seems somewhat remote and distant and not quite ready to engage hand to hand until enough times pass. They start to get a sense, my son Jay, of what it is that his features look like, and suddenly an eye is formed, right? So that he can start to look and know that it is he who is there, that they are one and the same. That person in the mirror doesn't have control over him, and yet maybe at that moment we start to see that he's the leader, and that whoever is in the other side is going to follow along with what he is doing. But that integrated sense of self, that person and this person are indeed the same person. Now, we don't know what age exactly it is, maybe somewhat different for boys and girls, when that image that's on the other side of the mirror starts to take on a little bit more of a critical glance and air. Perhaps we start to get judgmental about just the way we look, or how old it is that we appear on the other side, or maybe it is that we look too young, or the acne of adolescence comes along and we have to face who it is that we are. How do we reconcile this beautiful creation that God has created on the other side of the glass when who we think ourselves to be doesn't match exactly with what happens when we look in the mirror? All of this actually has so much to do with our faith. We hear it embedded in Scripture today that if we're willing to look at ourselves and see the truth that a mirror has to tell us, not just forgetting it or putting it aside on the shelf, then we're at great place for getting the clues we need to be in tune with who we are and to focus enough with who God has created in order to really live out the things that God calls us to do. Harry Emerson Fosdick, who is one of the pastors of Riverside Church many years ago, had this saying as he'd watched many years of pastoring and many people come through his doors. He said, "Those who look in the mirror and find something lacking, feel like they haven't gotten all they deserved in life. They look at their mirror image and they don't end up doing a whole lot of great living in the world." Similarly, he said there was another kind of folks who kind of looked in the mirror, reconciled themselves okay, figured they'd about broken even in this life, right? And that they got kind of what they earned. But the third kind that he relished in visiting and being with, was the person who looked in the mirror and just was overblown by the blessings that they had received. Kind of no matter what this image may have looked at, to think back over the course of one's life and see all the ways in which God continued to show up, even when it was hard and you got those extra wrinkles that had mapped themselves around your eyes. That somehow you could see God thereby reflected. And like the book of James, this author who is telling us to be blown away by the Father of lights, borrowing from some of the Greek philosophy and understanding of the time, the source, the one, the creator from whom all blessings can flow. For that pastor, Reverend Fosdick, those were the people. Those were the people that not only said they had faith, could read the scriptures, but then when it came down to it, just lived it. So that when they looked in the mirror, it wasn't with fear or shame about what was coming back at them, but with an assurance that God had indeed been great, and that where the life had taken them had brought some great joy. Now, the author is addressing a community of diaspora in Palestine. So these are Jews who would be followers of Jesus. We believe that the author of this text might even have been the half-brother of Jesus himself, full of great instruction and wisdom, blending a lot of the lessons from the Gospel of Matthew with some of the proverbs that would have been available through the Hebrew Scriptures, and finding a way to, in the imperative of the now moment that the communities were facing, with poverty and those who were rich, with all of the opportunities to be ugly to one another or indeed to reach out in love, he infuses this short book, 6 chapters, with these images that we can't help but grab onto. And some of them, and they're talking of cancerous tongues and their ability to thrust us in that moment, help us to see indeed ourselves in this ancient document from a long, long time ago. What is this law of liberty that is shared? These are folks that would have known the Torah, that would have known the law, and yet still trying to integrate it with this one who came to fulfill the law. The law of liberty is one in which we love God and love our neighbor. That's the law of liberty when you look in the mirror and you have been not so vainly focused on yourself, but indeed you can look long and maybe start to see the people for whom you have engaged in great witness and ministry. And maybe, as Anna has said, you can start to see God too in the co-creation that can happen when we don't walk away and forget the abundance of blessings that are blessing us. If that's true, then what if the Word is the mirror that moves with us? Kind of as we were seeing here, maybe not just standing static as a mirror, mirror on the wall kind of situation. But what if this is like those mirrors in the ballet studios? They're just always in front of us. And maybe we turn our back a little bit in rapture of the dance, but we're always back and having to face what's on the other side. Now, you could get distracted and get fumbly looking at what you're seeing. Don't try to do that if you're doing Zumba. Too much activity and motion. But what does it mean to be called back to oneself occasionally so that you do indeed start to look at your technique so that you can perform it in the most efficient way possible, using the energy that God has gifted you to do this beautiful thing? And how beautiful when we do it alongside each other. Is it one of the most beautiful things to see a formation, a duet, perhaps a dance troupe, who are all knowledgeable in what it is that they are seeing and can move in formation with each other? And sometimes in dances, there's a lot of flair, right? As each and every one of the players knows their role, and sometimes are called to improvise. And what does it mean to have a great improviser? But someone who knows the technique and who has done the studying like jazz, right? You have a good number because you've done the work to know the notes and the skills, and you know the pieces, and that's when you can riff. That's when you can go out together because you know yourself enough and you know your range. And it's then that you can soar into this image and beyond that God has gifted. Yes, what if the Word is like this moving mirror that even though uncomfortable sometimes when we trip and don't get it quite right, calls forth what we are capable of because we are God's called ones. Now back to this image of this little kid who's looking in the mirror, looking for the eye. Do you remember that song by Michael Jackson, The Man in the Mirror? Do you remember this? Yes? He's talking about seeing kids on the street with not enough to eat. And how can he be blind, pretending not to see them? And he says, what? I'm looking at the man in the mirror. He's going to change his ways. But of course, he's talking in third person, right? I'm looking at the man in the mirror, right? He's going to change his ways. What would it take to adopt and get to the point where we're saying, I'm looking at me in the mirror, right? That's that image of that there are those on the street, and those are the ones who can need help. And it's not just someone, one of those folks who's reflected into God's image and mirror that's going to take care of that. But what if, as that mirrored reflection is before us, that in that same mirror, not just here, but into the world, there is that one who is in front of us who desperately needs not somebody's help, not that man or that woman's help, but indeed me and what I can bring to this situation. For as we encounter this great big word in the world, we are indeed called to be the reflectors. That sometimes we're going to be the ones that need to lead and orchestrate in order to inspire others. That's what we do here at KC with our calls. We get the call on our heart and we start to try out new motions and new prayers, perhaps open up new scriptures. And if we're looking at James, we see that in so doing, we can help inspire others through our moral action and example. And through that confidence of that call, then it can become a movement. And we start to look around at each other and see the great symphony of this life. Now I've got before us some paper that will appear in the next 3 weeks in addition. And we've kind of got two options here. One, because I want us to be real about some of the image that we face. Some of the things that we've been taught and told that keep us from feeling comfortable in front of the faith mirror. The scroll on the left says, what I have been told or taught as I encounter the mirror. I wanted to put a bit of an example up here. Maybe some of you, as young women, may have been told, girls don't speak up. Right? Maybe this was something that you were told, and when you saw it in the mirror and you felt a burgeoning sense of talking and speaking out loud, then maybe you said, in my case as a Southern female, oh, I'm just going to put it in nice terms and I'll speak softly, right? With the accent. And I'd love for you over the course of Fellowship Hour this week and over the next weeks, we've talked about it as a team, and we'd love to see from you those things that could trip you up, those things that could, in your own faith life, perhaps you were taught by a pastor or a parent or something you adopted in your own reading and studying, something that you'd like to perhaps put aside. Even though it may be part of your journey and has spurred you on to a new place, that it's something that you look in the mirror and you say, I don't need you today. I'm just going to leave it here in lipstick. And we're going to go to the next piece. Perhaps when we've recognized those things that we've been taught or told, we can recognize what it is, what I choose to be and do. What I choose to be and do. Kind of like when we were talking about the choice about whether to see the blessings as they resemble themselves on our faces. What we choose to do with our call when we allow the inward work of our prayer reading, our scriptures, when we allow that inward work to start to transpose our hearts, to transform them, we can't help as a KC people then to be doers of the word, not just hearers or even seers of what we see, but to actually get in and start the motion and the doing. So I put my hand here, and for me, I put this morning, Face My Own Racism, and I put it on the wall as something that I trace with my very own hand. It's my way of owning it and recognizing it and claiming it as something I still work on and work towards facing, with also the implication that I'm going to continue to do what I can in order to help be a reflector of God's love in this great mirrored world that we serve and live in. So this is my invitation, our invitation to you in these next weeks. Be thinking what it is that I see that is part of me, but that I can also hang here on the wall. And then in the motion there and towards our outward sense of being, what is it that God is calling me to now? What is it that I believe as a part of my own being and doing, that I can reach out and touch that mirror and get it a little smudgy, right? Isn't that what happens when we touch mirrors? Is we get them all printed up. You should look at all of the windows in my house. That imprint is okay. Let's treat this beyond the looking glass, like our Allison and Wonderland moment, when not only do you go to touch what is out there, believing that God might somehow be reachable, but somehow there's a transcendence. And it's a little bit more like our mirrored exercise, where there's not really a plane of glass. There's not really a scriptural integrity that keeps us from getting to the other side, but the true living out, it's beyond the looking glass. And it's into the being and the doing, all merged into one. What if we could be such a mirrored people? The last note I want to make is that we have the gift of hearing Finlandia in just a few moments. It's from my husband Adam on the cello and from Liz on the piano. Listen to them in concert together as they draw upon the divine and play with the gifts that they have in order to live into this music. Jane Sibelius lived at the turn of the 19th into 20th century at a time in Finland when Russia had been dominant for nearly a century. And the Finnish people found covert ways sometimes of going up against that superpower, sometimes trying to claim pieces of their culture when they felt otherwise squelched out. And when John Sibelius came up with this piece at the end of a longer work and named it Finlandia, it couldn't even be called that at times because of the subversive nature of even its name. But when people heard it, it was as if a veil had been lifted from a mirror, and they could hear the beautiful sounds of their native land and could enjoy, even when they yet could not enjoy the freedom for their country, could nonetheless hear the resonance of who they were and who God would be calling them to be as a people. A lot of people thought that it was a tradition of old folk sounds and songs that he brought together, but it was actually his own invention, and it felt so much like home and so much like what people could hear and know that they thought he actually took it from other pieces. That is true gift and skill. When you take everything that you have learned, everything that you have read, and can then implement it into that beautiful place of creation, improvisation, and doing. So as we hear that a little bit later on, think about that merger, the beyond the mirrorness, when we take a piece that was written long ago and it's breathed into life in our very own space. My question as we come to a time of some community response is, What is it like for you to encounter Scripture and to find yourself in it? What is it like for you to find Scripture and find yourself in it?